Did you know that 50% of business decisions are influenced by groupthink? This statistic highlights the importance to combat this pervasive issue. Studies show that teams who experience groupthink make 30% less effective decisions when compared to those who encourage open dialogue and discord. And companies who are plagued by groupthink are going to have bigger financial losses. So let's dive into the concept of groupthink and its historical impacts. So I like to envision groupthink like the medieval films where they portray, the Iron Fist ruler who spreads terror across the land, and he says, hey, I'm the king and whatever I say goes. These types of kings, they spawn servants that are ready to die for their cause, and then the council members are the ones who are terrified of speaking up against them. Individuals will lie to please the king because they don't want to be killed, and this scenario provides a small weird glimpse of what groupthink is. Groupthink occurs when individuals conform to a belief despite not being fully convinced. This is often done to avoid conflict or repercussion. And the fact is that despite my example, groupthink is very relevant today. The fear of speaking up against authority or other major figures can lead to poor decision making and a disastrous outcome. If we shift it a little bit more to the business setting, we do see how groupthink creeps in when the majority of participants don't want to raise a concern. So you guys know how much I love to do examples. So there's 3 recruiters. One thinks that the employee is a good fit for the company. The other 2 think that he doesn't fit culturally. They present their arguments, and when it's your turn to talk, you may think, oh man, well, their minds are set. I'm not going to convince them otherwise. That is groupthink. That's the danger of groupthink, is that you may have an opinion and you don't want to raise it because you feel that you're going to be overpowered or that there's too many people who think the opposite. But just by you not speaking it, you participate in groupthink. And when this happens, it literally hinders innovation and strategic thinking. It suppresses critical thinking. All of a sudden, these decisions stop being for the best of the company and more so for the best of somebody's personal bias. And this is even worse for teams of a large amount of people because they start succumbing to these mundane ideas. There's no more creative solutions that are being accepted, or maybe even just alternate viewpoints. And the fact that you miss out on these types of opinions means that there's less opportunities available to you. And one of the most famous examples of groupthink is the Challenger space shuttle disaster. So in 1986, the Challenger space shuttle exploded. It took the lives of 7 astronauts, and this is often quoted as one of the biggest issues about groupthink. The explosion was caused by a faulty O-ring that could not withstand cold temperatures. The craziest part is that the engineers had identified and reported the issues with the O-rings. A whole year before the incident happened, they were saying, hey, these O-rings are eroding. There's erosion on them. We need to get them replaced. During a teleconference, NASA and Morton Thiokol engineers warned about the potential failures. However, groupthink prevailed. Engineers were overshadowed by NASA and Morton Thiokol managers. So you have 2 departments here. You have the engineers and the managers. The managers downplayed the severity of the issue. And these managers, being as clever as they are at communicating, they were able to strike fear into some of these engineers, and they began rationalizing their concerns. Eventually, this resulted in the explosion of the space shuttle only 73 seconds after launch. The Challenger disaster highlights several characteristics of groupthink. It was a suppression of dissenting opinions, the pressure to conform to the majority view, and the rationalization of questionable decisions. And this example is crazy because there's clear evidence of the risk. There's actual evidence showing, yes, the O-rings are eroding. We should replace them. And this was undermined. It was simply the desire to keep going with the launch and not delay it again that pushed these safety concerns to the side. So this is a testament to show how groupthink really shushed a lot of people that were raising safety concerns, and it was all more about the majority and what the majority thought, and they were actually able to convince a good chunk of the engineers to kind of brush it aside and say, you know what, I think you guys are right, even though they had proof that it wasn't right. And I just want to mention that not every engineer fell into that. There were some people who raised their voice to the last second, the day before it was almost shut down, and they were just outcasted. Aside from this, groupthink has appeared in other disasters as well. The Fukushima nuclear disaster of 2011 was partly due to the failure of the Tokyo Electric Power Company, or TEPCO. Executives did raise their hand and they said, hey, the plant's vulnerability to tsunamis is something that we need to consider. Japan has a high amount of tsunamis. The plant's location and the engineering, the construction was not fit for that. However, the culture within TEPCO discouraged dissent and they valued conformity. What this ended up being is just inadequate safety measures. And in turn, the safety measures maybe were not present at the start, but once the tsunami came in and all this nuclear waste was everywhere, then it became a pretty big issue. So the result was a catastrophic nuclear meltdown. So think about that impact, right? The fact that people were raising their hand, and again, groupthink prevailed. The majority, the vast voices overcame the small amount of people, and some of them were convinced otherwise. Instead of just standing still and saying, no, I'm not going to conform, I'm going to stick to my beliefs, some of them ended up moving sides. And another example is the financial crisis of 2008. Leading up to this financial crisis, there was a lot of investors, a lot of banks, a lot of economic parties. A lot of people knew that there was an impending housing market collapse coming. But bigger than that was the widespread belief that house prices would just keep on climbing up. This ultimately led to risky investments and a lack of critical scrutiny. The collective greed led to a lot of people being over leveraged, and eventually people went bankrupt because of this. If you guys haven't seen the movie The Big Short, then it kind of goes over a little bit of that, where people are betting that it is going to collapse, and some people are saying, well, you're betting against the government, and there's no way that's going to happen. And it did happen. And again, the voices from the majority overshadowed a lot of the voices that were not being heard. An example of groupthink. So what is the solution to all this? Well, as a leader, as manager, you want to foster an area for open communication. You want to actively encourage dissent. You want to seek out opinions that go against the norm. You want to create a culture where the status quo is a challenge and you find that valuable. You encourage your team members to speak up, to raise their opinion, to have a voice, even if it goes against the majority view. And maybe the way you recognize this is just you praise them and you say, hey, that was a good point that you brought up. Hey, that was a good question. Hey, that was a good statement. You don't have to follow everything they say. I'm not saying that people are going to be right all the time just because they have a conflicting opinion, but it's good to have conflicting opinions because it makes you kind of think of it in another way. Somebody else is seeing that way and they're probably not the only one. Another tip is that you want to promote open communication in the sense that you want your employees to feel safe when they are expressing their concerns. Scheduling meetings or having anonymous feedbacks can alleviate some of that stress from them from not wanting to participate. And you want to be approachable. You want to be somebody that employees feel good going up to and explaining their concerns. The third tip is to assign somebody as a devil's advocate. If you assign somebody some people are very good at this, and you have them be the devil's advocate to go against a lot of the norms, they could take that role pretty seriously and push back to the point where you can make a lot of fixes and make the process that you're trying to implement even better. And this also puts into perspective the other opinion of other people who might think like that. So again, if I think about bridging mindset, I always do this example, but I think about the bridge, right? You're on this side, you assign a devil's advocate who's going to be on this side, and together you kind of form the operation or the process that you're implementing, the product, the customer retention plan, whatever it is, more centered. And that gives you a better idea of what works. You also want a diverse team. You don't want people who all think the same. You want a team of diverse people with different experiences, with different backgrounds that have expertise in different areas, or that have different strong suits. Maybe not expertise in different areas, but different strong suits. Maybe somebody's more active, they're more opinionated. Maybe somebody's quieter, but whenever they talk, it's something that's very good. You want to have a mix of that in your team. So lastly, groupthink can lead to bottlenecks and inefficiencies in your work area. And the first step to prevent groupthink is to recognize its presence. And when you feel that your team is partaking in groupthink and not really pushing back on ideas, I suggest you educate your entire team on groupthink so that they can be made aware of what they're actually thinking and doing. You want to conduct reviews on decisions, and you want to make sure that you encourage the open dialogue again, but you really want to review back on those decisions that are being made and ensure that there is no type of influence or manipulation going on. Now, let's be honest, you're not going to be able to fix everything, but at least fostering a culture of critical thinking can itself put a barrier to that and alleviate a lot of that groupthink. So honestly, I challenge you this week to at least apply one of these strategic ideas that we discussed. Talk to your team, have them implement, put somebody as a devil's advocate, and start seeing how that kind of changes the conversation in meetings. And that's it for today's video, guys. Thank you for watching. I hope you liked it. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.